反對，我哋繼續開始返，好嗎？
Let's resume. Let's invite Mr. Kevin Young, Undersecretary for Education. First of all, I'd like to thank all the deputations for offering their comments today. In terms of the policy for NCS children, we have always sought to adopt an integrated education policy. In other words, we hope that NCS students can be equally distributed among all schools in Hong Kong. This way, they can live and learn in a harmonious manner. The objective is not just to help NCS students, but also to educate Hong Kong students to live with students of different cultural backgrounds. Hopefully, by the time they graduate, this harmonious approach would equip them well in their lives. In recent years, the government has made a number of improvements in education. For example, we have introduced a Chinese language curriculum, second language learning framework, and perhaps my colleagues can add more if time allows. A number of deputations offered their views on the learning framework. In terms of measures, we have also done a lot. We talked about student financial assistance schemes. A lot of materials are already available in 6 languages. For school place allocation materials, we have pamphlets in 6 languages as well. In terms of information to schools, a lot of parents might want to know more about the schools when they choose the school. For KG, primary and secondary school materials, all the materials must be in Chinese and English. So we have heard you, and we have tried to introduce more materials, and all this takes time. If you feel that certain materials are required, then we would study with schools on what materials to introduce.
Just now, you also mentioned in the last 2 years, there's a lot of resources given to the NCS. And we have a duty to ensure that they are gainfully used. In the learning framework for learning Chinese as a second language, we will undertake soon a review to ensure its effectiveness. If there is room for improvement, we will do so. However, the learning framework started in 2014. It is now 2 years since its launch, and we are keeping the continuous work up. We are training teachers, and it is not possible that we train all teachers within 2 years. We hope that the training will be better and better so that the teachers can take care of the NCS. In particular, better cultural understanding, which is essential in the training. Maybe we do not have enough time. However, I'd like to invite my colleague for the teaching and learning as a second language. Now, at 4:30, we would have to hand over the room, and we will also have another item by Mr. Dennis KWOK. And there is also a motion from Claudia Mo, Mrs. Claudia Mo, and she also need to receive some letters afterwards. So perhaps we can start first with the motion by Mrs. Claudia Mo, and I think looks to be rather simple. Maybe you can use 1 minute, Mrs. Claudia Moore. The subcommittee urges the administration to formulate clear and subjective value for money indexes so as for the Chinese language curriculum second language learning framework to supervise its effectiveness and provide improvement schemes. The administration should also provide teaching material and guidelines for a unified and appropriate learning framework to alleviate the teachers' administrative burden so that they can focus on the teaching and actual teaching and learning. The EDB should also collect and make public the data on the NCS in primary and secondary schools, etc. This motion is relevant to the item of agenda today, unless there is some opposing views. Then I think that it could be approved. Do we need to have a raise of hands? I'm asking if there's any opposition to this motion. For those who are for, raise your hands. Any one opposes? None. So we have approved it, the motion unanimously. So for the remaining time, we have 5 members who had raised their hands to speak, including Mrs. Moore. So now we have 6 requests to speak. Four minutes each. I hope that you would abide by the allotted time. 4 minutes each. Mrs. Claudia Moore. Thank you.
What contents of are simply heartbreaking. Ms. Asfa's presentation saying that many ethnic minority children are being called by teachers at school hyperactive, lazy, and that sort of naughty, inattentive, that sort of descriptions. I've heard them too, and that's racial, if not racist. I hope teachers would learn to really teach properly without generalizing our young. And my point number 2 is I was quite taken aback by Mr. Paul Zimmerman's letter that there in Hong Kong altogether 40 SEN establishments, well, educational, 60, not 40, 60 SEN schools for local students, but barely 1 for ethnic minority SEN students. Now that's just not right. Please do something about that. Please. My real question is, can you again please promise to work on a proper Chinese as a second language curriculum? Please stop calling it framework. I mean, framework, that doesn't mean anything. We need proper teaching materials. We need proper benchmarking, and we need proper assessment data. Could you at least promise that today?
Under Secretary of Education.
主席就
Chairman, with respect to teachers, I don't need you to respond to with respect to teachers. Respond to me. So you should have a proper Chinese language curriculum for second language learning.
第二語言嘅分別或者嗰個喺邊嚇？
好啊，你請講下。
李生。 多謝呢個提問。
Thank you. I'm not speaking about teaching method.
The Education Bureau Deputy Chief would answer that.
主席就或者等我答啦，即係我
Let me answer. First thing that we should understand is the learning framework. What is the difference between the Chinese language curriculum and the learning framework? Perhaps we are talking about the same thing, or are we not talking about the same thing? It is only at the title, or it is a matter of difference in content. Mrs. Mo, do you object to the response by another official? Well, the EOS saying that about the DSE, the Chinese language exam, is it possible that is it an optional exam that you don't have to take the exam of classics? In all language teaching, we have listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So there is a difference in content. For the second language, with respect to content expectations, there are differences. For instance, apart from the 4 skills that I mentioned, are we studying the article itself, the culture itself? Well, perhaps we don't have enough time. We'll give you time afterwards. Fernando Chang. Mrs. Claudia Mo mentioned, as well as other deputation also mentioned, that there should be a curriculum with materials with objective set, as well as an assessment scheme. This will help the NCS and the EMs. I had lived in the States for over 10 years. They have the ESL, English as a Second Language, courses offered in the United States, and they have also accompanying tools for the ESL. It is unfortunate that for a long time the CSL was avoided by the EDB. The Diocesan Pastoral Center mentioned that for the application for financial assistance, there are a lot of problems because not enough information has been given. Even though the EDB said that the information had been translated to 6 major minority languages. However, according to the survey by the Diocesan Pastoral Center, only 5.9% of the interviewers said that they received information in their language. And it is really unfortunate, and it is ineffective. And also, in the course of their application, they did not receive support. So perhaps the support centers should provide such service. For those SEN who are also NCS, if English is a medium teaching, you have only one school, the Sarah Rowe School. However, it is an ESF, and many EMs cannot afford it. And many of the EMs are now in the conventional schools or in the local SEN schools, SEN schools. In my daughter's school, there are several SEM from the EMs. They have language barriers. The parents cannot speak Chinese. These children not only have linguistic obstacles, they have also SEN obstacles, I don't see how you can respond to me, but I only want to raise that we have not been paying attention to this group. There's a low percentage of the EMs going further studies. You are talking about learning framework, but however, this has not improved the percentage of EMs in universities, and it is we are only continuing the segregation, and we are not enabling them to overcome poverty, and we are not giving chances to the next generation. There's a bit of time left. The Undersecretary. The entrance to the universities, we hope that there might be improvement in the statistics for the EMs. But is it the university entrance, the only index that we should take into account of? Wan Siu-kin. Apart from the sufficiency in policy and in curriculum, there is a very strange phenomenon in the course of learning. The EM's parents don't understand the manuals from the students. The manuals, even locals don't understand them, not to speak of the EMs. I feel that all of us present have learned English as a second language or even the third language. Why is it that we cannot learn from our first-hand language of learning a second language?
Miss Claudia Mo's request was very basic. Would you have basic proficiency tests or assessments to allow students of different levels to have a unified learning method or experience? I realize that some work has been done, but there must be a reason why you wouldn't call it a curriculum. From my understanding, under the framework, different methods of intervention would be adopted instead of using a single curriculum. But from what you said, this is even harder for them. Can the government tell us whether there can be a curriculum of learning Chinese as a second language to facilitate NCS students? And in terms of teachers' credentials, teachers can voluntarily take out courses so that they can teach EM students, but very few teachers actually sign up. You cannot just you cannot just keep it voluntary. You must motivate the teachers to do so. In terms of resources, as many deputations said today, for the threshold of 8 or 9 EM students for KGs and primary schools, I just wonder why you cannot fix a specific proportion or ratio instead. This would be more reasonable. 3 questions. Undersecretary, I would hand over to my colleague to talk about the Chinese learning framework. Mr. Lee. In terms of content, the teaching of literature and culture would be omitted in the learning of a second language. For a proper Chinese language, both language and culture must be taught. But we would look at the different starting levels of students. The difference between this framework and the mainstream framework is that the starting point is even lower, and we would start from the basics in the second language learning framework. Some people said we do not understand the language backgrounds of EMs. Well, this is a common challenge faced all around the world. We need to grasp the learning difficulties faced by different ethnicities, and our framework tackles all kinds of ethnic minority students. Mr. Eddie Chu, thank you. In the UK, a lot of South Asian friends had deep roots there, and they speak English better than a lot of English people. A lot of English novelists have out of South Asian descent. So first of all, in Hong Kong, I feel that ethnic minorities can certainly achieve similar levels in Chinese language learning. They are homegrown Hong Kong people. I have two questions. I agree with what Ms. Claudia Mo said. A number of deputations talked about learning Chinese as a second language. There is a lack of studies, teaching materials, as well as a holistic curriculum design. Specifically, Ms. Margaret Holmes she said that a lot of Chinese textbooks are written by authors or native Chinese authors for native Chinese students, and there are no English explanations or grammar references, and there aren't any vocabulary lists. I want to supplement that. Apart from English explanations, as Ms. Holmes suggested, well, different EMs speak different languages. They should learn Chinese via their mother tongues. This would be the most effective means. Now, this is the first question. And we have to see whether our teaching materials are inadequate, and secondly, even though there's no longer the requirement of designated schools, but in reality the separation still exists. Does EDB believe that it's best to integrate these students in the same schools? If that's the case, should we specify or designate a specific proportion of EM students in schools? Undersecretary, for the first question, under the framework, the EDB does provide resource kits for schools. In our review, we would see whether these resource kits or teaching materials are effective, and if necessary, we would improve them. As for the issue of designated schools, as I said in the last meeting, we canceled the arrangement once before, but the parents came back and asked for it again. That's why we reinstated the mechanism. All along, our approach is to encourage parents to go for other schools, and this would persist. As for setting a specific quota or proportion, this is not in our plans, because different people have different expectations and they live in different places. Mr. Holden Chow.
think we have to thank all the representatives by attending this meeting, and thank you for all your submissions. There are two questions. First of all, I think if we all note from the submissions from the representative, it seems that the teaching Chinese as a second language is indeed involves a totally different set of skills, and it seems that a standard guidelines or curriculum would be useful in enhancing the effectiveness of the program. So therefore, I would also like to learn what sort of things the government would be doing in order to propose or formulate that sort of curriculum. That's my first question. The second question is, I note from some of the submissions from these representatives that if they consider that the DSE is too difficult and the GCSE might be probably too easy. So it seems that there's nothing in between. If I'm wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong. If there is anything that you would provide as a midway arrangement between the two sides, I mean between DSE and GCSE, and I would like to learn some more information about that. So that's my second question. Yeah.
Right. And the Secretary of Education.
主席就
Chairman, for examinations available in Hong Kong, well, I would address the second question first. For exams available in Hong Kong, apparently there is a gap. But when we look at DSE, the examination is based on different levels, and there are 5 levels, and it represents different proficiencies. Starting from, well, between level 2 and 5, the levels of proficiency vary greatly. But there is a gradation between levels 2 and 5. We also implement applied learning Chinese lessons, and they are more pragmatic, and they teach common Chinese language used in the workplace for reading, writing, speaking, and listening. If you achieve a pass in applied learning Chinese, it would be equivalent to level 2, and if they achieve merit, then it would be equivalent to level 3. So we are trying to provide more options so that students can learn according to their abilities. So Mr. Lee can talk more about the curriculum measures. Currently, applied learning courses are designed for Secondary 4 and beyond. We can continue to make adjustments at lower forms. A contextual approach would be applied to language teaching. So these elements are not mutually exclusive of each other.
Yeah, I just would like to know, so that means the students are free to choose between DSE and the one you just mentioned, the applied Chinese? They are free to take any of those exams. Am I right? Yeah.
主席就應用
Chairman, applied learning Chinese is actually a part of DSE. Apart from our main subjects, we have applied learning courses as well, and we have applied learning Chinese. In some cases, they can opt for that option instead of the mainstream Chinese subject. Just now, Mr. Andrew Wan asked 2 questions which have not been answered, so perhaps I would invite the government to talk about the motivation measures. Can Mr. Wan repeat the questions, please? Motivating teachers so that they would learn how to teach non-Chinese speaking students. And the second question is about resources. On the threshold of 9 or 10 students, can do we have any alternative option? When we established the threshold, we set it at 8 or 9. The reason is that in terms of language learning, immersion is very important. So in a primary or secondary school environment with less than 10 EM students, the Chinese language environment is more or less dominant, and students would have more opportunities to learn Chinese. That's why we decided to implement this measure. For schools under 10 EM students, the EDB can provide more resources in support. We would also provide $50,000 in funding. In kindergartens, there is no specific Chinese subject or course. We are drawing up the pre-primary curriculum or guidelines. We are trying to incorporate games in a Chinese learning environment. So in terms of teaching for schools with less 8 EM students, schools can use their own or existing resources. In terms of support to teachers, you asked whether any motivations would be given. This is something we can consider. However, we feel that most teachers would look to improve themselves, and we trust that if possible, teachers would do more to improve themselves. Some of them might be busy in their daily work, so we will monitor the number of trained teachers to see whether something needs to be done. Thank you very much for the comments.
Mr. Lee, you can add something. I do not have anything to add. Are there follow-up questions from members? Mr. Andrew Warner. The two responses I just had are not really logical. Well, a lower number of EMs would allow the school have better environment so that not additional assistance would be needed. Whether it be 9 or 10 or above, the external circumstances don't change. Perhaps there might be a little bit more interaction if that is so. However, I think the logic should be the reverse. Whether it's 8 or 10 students, you need the same teaching resources. It's not that you have less students that you give them worse resources. Now, we can see that if there's no incentive, things would not improve. There are two items that we have to deal with. The application for late membership from Honorable Dennis KWOK. In November 23rd, Mrs. Jiang Lai-wen would like to have some explanations. I understand that Dennis KWOK has something to discuss with the chairman, but Mrs. Jiang Lai-wen is not present here. So maybe we can settle the matter here. Are there any opposition views? Well, since it was Mrs. Jiang Lai-wen who raised this question, well, she's not even present. And she's not here to listen to the reasons for this late membership application. Mr. Dennis KWOK is here. Maybe Mr. Dennis KWOK, you are here? Even though Mrs. Jiang Lai-wen is not here, but would you mind explaining why you are late? for the membership application. I was at the chairman's meeting just now. I have rushed back. The Civic Party has always much concerned with the rights of the EMs. Fernando Cheung and me had spent 3 years to draw up a bill for the EM rights, including the NSCs, and if they have SNEN needs, the difficulties are immense. I also share this concern. That is why I hope that joining this subcommittee would allow me to express my views and would also represent views that we have heard. Do you need to have any follow-up from the explanations by Mr. Dennis KWOK? I would approve his membership application. So the we have A to K items for the matters to be discussed. A is the learning for the second language. So this will be also the item for our next meeting. For G, employment difficulties, I'm also aware that it is a matter of concern for the EMs. So I think that for our next meeting, we will select G, small g, employment difficulties of the EMs as the matter to be discussed at the next meeting. So we have finished the discussion.
Okay, thanks very much, Law. 我哋到議會到此為止。
The meeting is adjourned.